Life has a way of changing in an instant. One moment, everything seems perfectly normal, the plans, the dreams, the expectations for the future, and in the next, everything is shattered. I remember that day so vividly. The road stretched ahead, the sky was clear, and there was no reason to believe that life wouldn't continue just as it had been. But fate had its own plans. There was a sudden jolt, the sound of metal twisting, the overwhelming impact, and then silence. I opened my eyes to chaos. Pain shot through my body, but more than that, there was a sinking realization that something was terribly wrong. I couldn't move. I couldn't feel my legs. Lying there, trapped in a moment that would define the rest of my life, all I could think about was what now? The journey from that accident to where I stand today wasn't just about healing physically. The hardest wounds to heal aren't the ones on the body, they are the ones on the soul. I was taken to the hospital, and that was when I heard the words that no one ever wants to hear. You will never walk again. The world around me blurred. I wanted to scream, to cry, to wake up from what felt like a terrible nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was my new reality. I had always been someone who believed in dreams, who thought that life was meant to be lived fully. But lying in that hospital bed, motionless, helpless, I wondered if there was anything left for me anymore. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one filled with excruciating pain, both physical and emotional, surgeries, endless treatments, and a body that refused to cooperate. And in the midst of it all, a mind that was drowning in questions. Why me? What had I done to deserve this? I remember looking at myself in the mirror for the first time after the accident. The reflection staring back at me was unrecognizable, the same person yet different in every way. A body that had once been strong was now confined to a wheelchair. A future that had once been limitless now felt like a dead end. And the most painful thought of all, was I still enough? Would I ever be enough again? People came to visit, their faces filled with sympathy, their words dripping with pity. They tried to console me, but all I could hear were the unspoken words behind their eyes. She's broken now. She will never be the same. And for a while, I believed them. I allowed myself to sink into that darkness, to believe that my life had ended that day on the road. I refused to see the possibility of anything beyond my pain. But then, something changed. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, it was just a small, quiet realization that whispered in the depths of my soul, you are still here. Maybe I couldn't walk, maybe life would never be the same, but I was still breathing, my heart was still beating, and that meant something, that had to mean something. I started asking myself different questions. Instead of why me, I asked, what now? Instead of focusing on what was lost, I searched for what was left. And in that search, I found something I never expected: strength. The kind of strength that doesn't come from the body, but from the mind, from the soul. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't. It took everything I had to lift myself out of that despair. There were moments of frustration, moments of hopelessness, moments when I wanted to give up. But every time I thought I had reached my breaking point, I reminded myself, this is not the end. There is still more to do, still more to become. I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I stopped hoping for things to go back to the way they were, because they wouldn't. But maybe, just maybe, they could become something new. And maybe, just maybe, that new version of life could be even more meaningful than the one I had before. So I chose to fight, not for what was lost, but for what was still possible, not for the life I once had, but for the life I could still create, because in the end, what truly defines us is not what happens to us, but what we choose to do with it. People often talk about physical pain. They see the wounds, the scars, the broken bones, and they understand. They acknowledge it. They sympathize with it. But what about the pain that no one sees? The pain that doesn't leave visible scars but lingers deep within, in the quiet moments, in the silent nights, in the spaces between breaths. That pain is heavier, darker, and much harder to escape. Lying in that hospital bed for months, I wasn't just battling a broken body, I was battling a broken soul. The hardest part wasn't that I couldn't walk, it was that I couldn't recognize myself anymore. Everything I had once been, everything I had once dreamed of, felt like it had been stripped away. I was no longer the person I used to be, and that terrified me. People would come in with their words of encouragement, telling me to stay strong, that everything would be okay. But how could they possibly understand? How could they look at me, trapped in a body that no longer listened to me, confined to a wheelchair I never asked for, and say that things would be okay? I wasn't okay. I was angry, I was broken, and I was drowning in a silence that no one could hear. I remember the first time I was left alone in my room after the accident. The door shut, and for the first time, there were no doctors, no visitors, no distractions, just me and the crushing weight of everything I had lost. That was when the real battle began. It wasn't with my body, it was with my mind. The thoughts came like a storm, relentless and unforgiving. What's the point? What kind of future can I have now? Will anyone ever look at me the same way again? Will I ever be enough? These questions became my constant companions, whispering doubts into every corner of my mind. And the worst part, I started believing them. There were nights when I would stare at the ceiling, wishing I could go back in time, wishing that 1 second could be undone, that the accident had never happened. But life doesn't work that way. No matter how much I wished, how much I cried, how much I begged, there was no going back. And that realization hurt more than anything. For the longest time, I carried that pain like a shadow. It followed me everywhere, pulling me deeper into despair. I stopped speaking. I stopped hoping. I stopped believing that my life had any meaning beyond that hospital bed. And the world outside kept moving on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to escape the suffocating thoughts that told me I would never be enough again. And then, in the depths of that darkness, something happened. Not a miracle, not a sudden burst of inspiration, just a simple, quiet moment where I realized that if I kept letting these thoughts consume me, I would lose the only thing I had left, myself. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. I had to fight, not just for the sake of surviving, but for the sake of truly living. I had to find a reason to wake up every day, to believe in something more than my pain, to believe that my story wasn't over yet. I started small. I began searching for little things that made me feel alive again. I allowed myself to cry, to grieve, but I also forced myself to smile, even when it felt unnatural. I pushed myself to find joy in moments that I once overlooked. And slowly, the weight on my chest started to lift. The world hadn't changed. My situation hadn't magically improved, but something inside me had shifted. I realized that I had been waiting for someone to pull me out of my darkness when, all along, the only person who could save me was myself. I won't say that the sadness disappeared overnight. It didn't. There were still bad days, moments of doubt, times when I wanted to fall back into that darkness. But the difference was that I no longer let those moments define me. I no longer let them control me. I chose to believe in myself even when it felt impossible. I chose to fight against the voices that told me I was not enough. And in doing so, I discovered a truth that changed everything. Strength isn't about never feeling broken. It's about rising despite the brokenness. There are moments in life when everything feels like it has been taken away, when the dreams once held so tightly slip through the fingers like grains of sand, leaving behind only emptiness. After the accident, that emptiness consumed everything. The world outside kept moving, but inside it felt like time had stopped. Everything that once brought joy, purpose, and meaning seemed to have vanished, leaving behind nothing but silence. Lying in bed day after day, trapped within a body that no longer felt like my own, I questioned everything. What was left for me now? What could I possibly do when the one thing I had taken for granted, my ability to move, to run, to live without limits, had been taken away in an instant? The walls of that hospital room felt smaller every day, and the loneliness within them grew louder. One day, someone placed a paintbrush in my hand. It was meant to be a distraction, a way to pass the endless hours. At first, it felt pointless. What was the use of painting when nothing in my life made sense? My hands trembled, unfamiliar with the weight of the brush, hesitant to move across the canvas. But in that hesitation, something shifted. The first stroke of paint felt like a whisper, quiet but powerful. It was as if for the first time in months I had found a way to speak without words. The colors bled together, each one holding an emotion too deep to express in conversation. Pain turned into brush strokes, sadness became shades of blue, resilience emerged in bold, vibrant hues, and in that moment something stirred within me. Day after day, I returned to the canvas, allowing my emotions to take form in color and texture. It wasn't just about creating art, it was about rediscovering the parts of myself that I thought had been lost. The fear, the anger, the hopelessness. They all found their place in the paintings. And with each piece, I began to understand something important. My body may have been broken, but my spirit was not. There is a certain kind of healing that happens when the soul is given space to express itself. For months, I had been trapped in a cycle of grief, mourning a version of myself that no longer existed. But as the paintings filled the empty walls around me, I started to see a different story unfold, one not defined by loss, but by transformation. People began to take notice. They saw the emotions woven into each piece, the silent battle between pain and hope. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone who still had something to give. That changed everything. The world often measures strength in physical terms, in the ability to stand tall, to move freely, to conquer with force. But real strength, I realized, is in the ability to create something meaningful out of brokenness, to take what is shattered and piece it together into something beautiful. Art became more than just an escape. It became a declaration, a statement that despite everything, despite the pain and the limitations, there was still something powerful left within me. And if that was true for me, then it was true for anyone who has ever felt broken, who has ever believed that their struggles define them. Life does not always go the way we plan. Sometimes it takes everything from us, leaving behind only questions and uncertainty. But even in the darkest moments, there is always something to hold on to, something that reminds us that we are more than our pain, more than our struggles, more than the labels the world places upon us. I found my strength in art. Someone else may find it in words, in music, in helping others, in simply choosing to wake up each day and keep going. It does not matter where we find it, only that we never stop searching. Because as long as there is breath in our lungs, there is the possibility to create, to grow, to turn our pain into something greater than ourselves. People often ask, how did you find the strength to keep going? The truth is, strength isn't something that suddenly appears in a moment of crisis. It isn't something you wake up with one day, fully formed and ready to carry you through life. Strength is built piece by piece in the moments when giving up feels easier than holding on. It's in the choices we make every day to rise, to keep moving forward, to refuse to let our circumstances define us. After the accident, there was a time when I believed my story was over. Everything I had planned for my life had disappeared in an instant, and I was left with nothing but questions. Who was I now? What could I offer the world? What was my purpose if I could no longer be the person I once was? For the longest time, I let those questions consume me, convincing myself that I had no answers. But then something changed. It wasn't a single moment of revelation or an instant transformation. It was a series of small, quiet decisions. The decision to pick up a paintbrush when I felt empty. The decision to speak when I was afraid. The decision to say yes to opportunities that terrified me. Step by step, I started to rebuild not the life I had before, but a new one, shaped by resilience instead of regret. It started with a voice, one I had kept buried under self-doubt and fear. When I was invited to speak about my journey for the first time, I hesitated. Who would want to listen? What did I have to say that could possibly matter? But then I thought about the people who might be sitting in the audience, feeling just as lost as I had once felt. If sharing my story could give even one person hope, then wasn't that worth the risk? So I spoke. I stood before strangers, my voice shaking, my hands trembling, and I told my truth. I spoke about the pain, the darkness, the battles I had fought in silence. And as I did, something incredible happened. People listened. Not out of pity, but out of understanding. They saw themselves in my struggles, in my fears, in my journey of learning to rise again. That was when I realized that strength is not just about surviving hardship. It's about transforming it into something meaningful. It's about taking the worst moments of life and using them as a foundation to build something greater than yourself. Strength is not measured by what we have lost, but by what we choose to do with what remains. Opportunities began to come, not because I was seeking them, but because I was finally open to them. I became a speaker, not because I had all the answers, but because I knew what it felt like to be lost. I became an artist, not because I was trained, but because I needed a way to express everything words couldn't capture. I became an advocate, not because I had planned for it, but because I knew how it felt to be unheard. People called it courage, but I knew better. It wasn't about being fearless. It was about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Every time I sat in front of an audience, every time I shared my journey, every time I used my voice to challenge the way the world sees strength, I was still afraid. But I had learned that fear is not a stop sign, it is simply a test of how badly we want to rise, how deeply we believe in our own resilience. For years, I thought my wheelchair was a limitation. I thought it was a symbol of everything I had lost. But now, I see it for what it truly is. Not a cage, but a platform. A platform that allows me to stand taller than I ever did before. A platform that has given me the strength to reach people in ways I never imagined. A platform that reminds me every single day that nothing is impossible unless we decide it is. Strength is not about being unbreakable. It is about being broken and choosing to rise anyway. It is about taking the pain, the setbacks, the losses, and turning them into fuel for something greater. It is about refusing to let the world define what is possible for you. Here's the expanded segment for key point 5, maintaining the natural flow and conversational tone. For the longest time, I believed that love was meant to complete us, that it was something we searched for in another person, something that would fill the empty spaces within us. And maybe that's what most of us are taught, that love is something we receive, something that is given to us, something that, once found, makes life whole. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked for, in ways we never accepted. There was a time when I thought love meant being accepted, being seen, being chosen, that if someone loved me enough, I would always be enough. And so I held on to that idea, believing that as long as I had love, I had a sense of worth. But love, in the way I had imagined it, was not unconditional. It came with expectations, with requirements, with silent rules that I was never told about until I could no longer meet them. After the accident, I learned what it meant to be abandoned by the very people I thought would always stay. I learned what it felt like to look into the eyes of someone who once swore to stand by my side, only to see hesitation, pity, discomfort. I learned that love, when it is not real, fades when life gets hard. And for a long time, I thought that meant I was unworthy, that I had somehow become less simply because someone else could no longer love me the way they once did. The pain of that realization was heavier than anything I had ever carried. It was the kind of pain that made me question not just my worth, but my very existence. If love was supposed to be unconditional, then why did it leave when I needed it most? If love was supposed to heal, then why did it hurt so deeply? For a while, I let that pain define me. I let it convince me that I was not enough, that I was too broken to be loved, that no one would ever see me beyond my scars. But one day, in the midst of that darkness, a thought came to me. What if love was never meant to come from someone else? What if the love I had been searching for was the love I had never given myself? That question changed everything. I had spent so much time waiting for others to see my worth, to make me feel whole, to remind me that I mattered. But what if I could do that for myself? What if I could look at my reflection with all its imperfections, with all its broken pieces, and still choose love? And so I started small. I spoke to myself the way I wished someone would. I forgave myself for believing I was not enough. I chose to see beauty where I had only seen loss. I learned to celebrate my own existence, not because someone else validated it, but because I did. It wasn't easy. There were days when the doubts crept back in, whispering that I was still unworthy, still incomplete. But the difference was that this time I did not listen. I had spent too long believing that love was something external, something that could be given or taken away. Now I understood that the most powerful love, the love that truly lasts, is the one we give ourselves. That love is the foundation for everything. It is the reason we rise after we fall. It is the reason we choose to keep going even when the world tells us we can't. It is the reason we refuse to let someone else's inability to love us define what we deserve. Loving oneself is not arrogance. It is not selfishness. It is survival. It is choosing to believe every single day that despite the pain, despite the losses, despite the scars, we are still worthy. Not because of what we have, not because of what we can do, but simply because we exist. For the longest time, I searched for someone to complete me. Now, I know I was never incomplete to begin with. People often wait for the perfect moment to start living. They wait for the right opportunities, for the right people to come into their lives, for the circumstances to be just right before they take a step forward. But life does not wait. It does not pause for us to be ready. It moves forward, whether we choose to move with it or not. For a long time, I waited too. I waited for my life to go back to what it was, for my body to heal, for the pain to disappear, for things to make sense again. I waited to feel whole before I could start again. But the truth is, waiting only made the days longer, the nights darker, and the doubts louder. I kept thinking that once the pain was gone, I would be ready. Once the grief had faded, I could begin again. But what I didn't realize was that healing does not happen in the waiting. It happens in the living. There was no single moment where everything suddenly felt okay. There was no sudden realization that made the fear disappear. It happened in the small moments, in the choices that seemed insignificant at the time. It happened when I decided to embrace the life I had rather than mourn the one I had lost. It is easy to let the past define us, to let the things we have lost dictate what we believe is possible. It is easy to stay trapped in the memory of what was, instead of building something new. But life is happening now, in this moment, in every breath, in every sunrise. It is not waiting for us to be ready. It is asking us to have the courage to step forward even when we are afraid. For the longest time, I believed that I needed to have everything figured out before I could move forward. But now, I understand that no one has it all figured out. We are all just learning as we go, stumbling, falling, getting back up, and that is okay. The only real failure is never trying at all. Fear will always be there. It will whisper reasons why we should not take risks, why we should not dream too big, why we should stay where we are. But fear is only powerful if we listen to it. The moment we decide to move forward despite it, we take away its control. Happiness is not something we find, it is something we create. It is in the choices we make every single day, to find joy in the little things, to be grateful for what we have instead of focusing on what we lack, to love ourselves even when the world makes us feel unworthy. It is in the decision to live fully, not someday, but today. If there is one thing I have learned, it is that life is unpredictable. It does not always go the way we planned. It challenges us, breaks us, tests us in ways we never expected. But within every challenge, there is also an opportunity to grow, to change, to discover a strength we never knew we had. There will always be reasons to wait, always excuses to put off the life we truly want. But in the end, the only moment we truly have is now. And if we do not choose to live it, no one else can do it for us.